this is Mac. Welcome back, and in today's video, we're going to turn our Benelli M2 shotgun into a 3-gun monster by installing a Taran Tactical Innovations trigger and hammer spring set. Installing the Taran Tactical Innovations hammer and trigger spring for your Benelli M2 shotgun is really simple. It only requires a couple of simple hand tools and should take you less than 5 to 10 minutes. The springs are going to come packaged in this small bag from Taran Tactical, and the great thing about Taran is that he's going to include a couple of extra C-clips in the pack because these things are really easy to lose, and if you don't have any more for your shotgun, it's absolutely not going to function. To get started, as always, you got to make sure that your shotgun's safe. So clear it out and make sure the chamber's empty. And you're going to want to remove your trigger group from the shotgun. And that's most easily accomplished by pushing the retaining pin out from the left-hand side of the shotgun using a small punch. You absolutely do not have to tap it out with a hammer, so don't do that. And once you have it out, you want to inspect it and clean it and make sure that everything's functioning properly. And first thing that you're going to need to do is to decock the hammer, and make sure you keep your finger on the hammer as you pull the trigger to do this. Next, we need to remove the plunger and the plunger spring, and this is connected to the lifter or the carrier. The plunger spring is responsible for the action of the lifter. So make sure that you don't lose the small O-ring that goes on the back. It's a retaining ring. It's made out of metal. I'm just going to leave mine in the trigger group here and make sure that I don't lose it. Now, you don't need to completely strip this trigger group down. All you need to do is remove the first little C-clip here, which is on the retaining pin, and once you remove that, set it to the side. Next, we need to remove the hammer spring and the cap, which retains the hammer spring. And this is held in place by a very small silver tab, which is a part of the shell release lever. Now, to remove the hammer spring, you'll need to remove first this cap that holds it in, and that is retained by a small silver tab, which is a part of the shell release lever. Now, to remove the shell release lever just slightly enough to get the spring out, you need to move the trigger pin bushing over to the side. And keep a finger over the cap so that the spring doesn't go shooting across the room. But you can just remove that factory spring and then take the larger spring out of the Taran Tactical pack, and this is your hammer spring. I like to place it in the cap first and then place the whole entire mechanism down into the hole into the trigger group. And you can use that small little silver tab to help you to keep tension on the spring. So as you're compressing it, use your finger to keep it down. And you'll need to push this down far enough to let that silver tab capture it. I've used roll pin punches before to be able to do this, but I found out this time that it's much easier just to use the hammer. So I'll rock the hammer back into the cocked position to push the hammer spring down, and then that'll allow me to push the trigger pin bushing back into the right position. And as you can see now, I've got that spring captured using the silver tab on the shell release lever. And now I just need to reinstall my retaining clip. And if you notice, this clip is kind of a D shape. One side of it is flat, and that's made to fit into a very special flat area on the bushing. So locate that flat area and put the flat side of the D-shaped clip underneath it, and then just pop it right back into place with your pocket knife or your finger. And the first half of this job is finished. Now I want to function check the hammer and make sure that it's working, make sure the spring is not bound up in any way. And I'll pull the trigger just to make sure that everything's working. And now that I'm confident that it is, I'm going to reinstall my plunger and plunger spring. And the easiest way to do this is to install the plunger through the spring, place the back end of the plunger into the retaining clip, and then just slide the front end right down the bolt latch. Now there's a hole in the bolt latch that the plunger has to go in, so make sure that you have it all the way correctly installed. And just as a side note, make sure that the spring on the shell release lever is not bound up or improperly installed in any way, or else your shotgun will not function. Now it's time to work on the trigger spring, and this is much easier, if you can believe that. There's only 2 pins in the trigger, one in the front and one more to the rear. Push out the one to the rear while pulling back on the trigger, and once you do that, you can rock the trigger forward, and this will expose the disconnector and the spring that we're going to change out. The spring fits into a hole in the bottom of the disconnector, and you can just shake that right out. As you can see, it's a much smaller spring than the hammer spring. And when I compared the Taran tactical spring to my factory Benelli spring, I noticed that the Taran spring was just slightly longer. And I don't know if this is by design or if it's just because mine has been used more and it's slightly compressed. That is the more likely answer. But it's also possible that the Taran spring being lighter, it could be slightly longer. So you just pop this into the hole in the disconnector, and then rock the trigger back into its resting position, and then replace the retaining pin with your finger. It doesn't require a lot of force to reinstall if you pull back on the trigger. That's going to make this job a whole lot easier if you pull it to the rear and just slide it in with your fingers. One last step while I'm pulling back to the rear, and everything's back installed properly. Again, I'll function check this just to make sure my safety works, make sure that the trigger pulls and releases the hammer properly before reinstalling into my M2. Now I'm just going to quickly wipe this down. I only clean my Benelli about twice a year because of the inertia system. It runs fairly clean. But I did have a little bit of powder and residue on it from a recent match. So a quick wipe down, and then I'll replace my trigger group and lifter back into the gun. You need to do this from the rear position first because there's a small ledge that needs to fit into the stock. And then just replace the retaining pin from the right side of the gun toward the left, and you're all finished. Now I was really excited to get this out and pull the trigger a few times out in the garage. And I was really surprised with how much different the trigger felt. After making sure that the gun was unloaded and safe, I just dry fired it a few times, and it was remarkably lighter and crisper. Really impressed with these springs from Taran Tactical. And when I put it on my trigger pull gauge, it was quite a bit lighter as well. 3.4 to 3.5 pounds over about 8 pulls that I averaged. 3.4 pound trigger pull, which I was very impressed with. 3.4 pounds. 3.4. Hopefully that'll work. So thanks for joining me for this installation video. I really love how this trigger feels on my Benelli M2 now. It's a very consistent 3.4 to 3.5 pound trigger pull, and it's really quick for follow-up shots. And this shotgun is really a screamer now. It always has been my absolute favorite gun, but for 3-gun, in my mind, there's no better setup than this. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to my channel. You can do that by clicking on the video in the upper left. As a subscriber, you'll be immediately notified every time I upload a video on a weekly basis. And these videos include guns and gear reviews, as well as content that's always related to 3-gun. And also, to watch more of my most popular videos, click on the video on the lower left. Once again, this is Mac,